Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the series that features women who are working to save historic places. Thank you to DMX Architecture for their generous support of women in preservation. Many of you are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you for your support. But if you're not already a member, I invite you to please join us. Your membership provides vital support for our organization and allows us to continue the important work of saving Arkansas's historic places. And as you can see on the screen, membership comes with all kinds of benefits, including new t-shirt designs and stickers. Learn more and become a member at preservearkansas.org. Preserve Arkansas is excited to partner with our friends at Main Street Arkansas to host a preservation track at Destination Downtown in El Dorado, September 10th through the 12th. Destination Downtown is the South's premier downtown revitalization conference, and it's hosted by the Main Street Coordinating Programs in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Registration is open until September 1st. You may learn more and register on our website at preservearkansas.org. Join us next month on September the 9th for a talk by Sharon Killian, co-founder and chair of NWA Black Heritage, which seeks to document, preserve, share, and celebrate the heritage and contributions of African Americans in Northwest Arkansas. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Dr. Robyn Lane and Rachel Tucci. Dr. Robyn Lane is a teaching professor of landscape architecture at the University of Arkansas and a former research associate at the UA Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies. Her research focuses on the application of spatial technology in historic documentation and has included work on the World War II Japanese-American incarceration camps at Rower and Jerome, the Civilian Conservation Corps in Arkansas State Parks, and at Vicksburg National Military Cemetery. Rachel Tucci is an assistant professor of interior architecture and design at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. Her teaching focuses on the history of interior design and integrating digital technology into the design process. Rachel is also a practicing interior designer at SCM Architects in Fayetteville. Her practice focuses on historic projects and higher education and workplace projects across the state. Rachel has a BS in interior design from Harding University and an MS in interior architecture and historic preservation from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Welcome, Robyn and Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. We're excited to hear your talks.
I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and get started. As I said, thanks for inviting me. Very happy to be here and to share some of the work I've been involved with over the last 15 years. First of all, I want to make it very clear that I am not an expert in historic preservation. My area of expertise is actually in geospatial technologies and how they can be applied in heritage documentation. So with that said, you should know I am a history buff. So, a little bit about how I got involved in heritage documentation. First of all, I would say that it's kind of a family characteristic. You probably don't know this, but Rachel and I are actually first cousins. And so it was a surprise when we were both asked to share our work on the same presentation day. Happy coincidence. As a bit of background, I grew up in a very small town in north central Arkansas where we had a historic main street as well as a ghost town that was directly adjacent. And so I grew up always interested in buildings, not just the buildings though, but the stories they told about how people lived. So it was all something that was just part of my life growing up, both through books and through travel and through conversation. After I graduated from high school in Calico Rock, I ended up in Fayetteville at the University of Arkansas, where I graduated from the landscape architecture program here. I went to work immediately after graduation locally in Northwest Arkansas in what was primarily a commercial development role. So this was in the mid 1990s when Northwest Arkansas was really experiencing its first round of real urban growth. So there was a lot going on in those years. I practiced initially for several years and got my landscape architectural license. But as you can imagine, you can only find so much meaning in helping developers build strip malls and subdivisions. And I was getting bored. One of the last projects I worked on was a big box retail development in Hot Springs, and the site was really not suitable for development. And throughout the project, I just found myself thinking just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. So that really became the impetus for me to go to grad school. And I ended up going back for a master's degree in geography and ended up sticking that out for a PhD in environmental dynamics. And in both of those programs, I relied really heavily on geospatial technologies for my research. And then as I was working on my dissertation, a job opening came up at the Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies, known more colloquial as CAST. I applied and I started there in 2007. So CAST was a really great place to work. Um, I basically got paid to learn new things and play with cool toys. And I got to do it with a lot of really smart and fun people who had a wide variety of knowledge and experiences: geographers, geodesists, anthropologists, and archaeologists, computer scientists, and programmers. And we had a lot of technical expertise in heritage documentation. And it's because of CAST and my role there that I got involved in heritage documentation. And it started in 2010 when the Kotzen Institute of Archaeology at UCLA asked CAST to run an archaeology field school in Elefsina, which is a small town about 13 miles northwest of Athens. In collaboration with a local archaeology professor, we spent 5 weeks there running a field school, teaching archaeology students from all over the world how we used terrestrial LiDAR, GPS, and GIS to document heritage sites. It was a really beautiful site and lots of fun to spend time there working on it. But just as a little background about the site itself, Elefsina is a modern town that surrounds the Eleusis archaeological site, which is where the rituals that were associated with the Eleusinian mystery cult took place twice a year. In the photo on the screen, you can see a cave in the background. And this was thought to be the mouth of the underworld. And it's what Hades used when he abducted Persephone, was the story. So the mystery cult itself is one of the most famous mystery cults of ancient Greece and one of the oldest. And it was dedicated to honoring Demeter and Persephone through secret rites that happened in both the spring and the fall. And so this site was most active between 800 BCE to 400 AD, although there's evidence that the site was used as early as 1600 BCE by the Mycenaeans. And so as you can imagine, there was a lot of development over the course of about 1,000 years that we were documenting and trying to distinguish how those were characterized and how you could tell the difference from them. So that was my first experience in heritage documentation, and it set the stage for me for future projects. So probably the most significant project that I've been involved in, and the one that's probably closest to my heart, is our work on the Japanese American incarceration camps in Southeast Arkansas. This project originated with my colleague, Kimball Erdman, who many of you may know is because he's been active in historic preservation and documentation in Arkansas for the last 15 years. At that time, he was a professor of landscape architecture here at U of A and was new to the area and new to Arkansas. And he had joined in a collaboration with the folks at UALR to kind of memorialize and restore the cemetery at the Rower incarceration camp. He was also teaching a class in historic preservation and developing this restoration plan, which was in serious disrepair for the cemetery. And he contacted CAST to see what assistance we could provide. And so we went down and did terrestrial LiDAR scanning of the cemetery itself. And we also provided GPS equipment and trained the students on how to use GPS and GIS to document the site. And that led up into this collaboration on a proposal to the National Park Service Japanese American Confinement Sites Program to digitally recreate the Rower relocation camp. That was in 2013. We were funded and we began work in 2014, developing the first iteration of the current website, which features interactive maps, an interactive timeline, a searchable digital archive of objects and documents that are unique to the Arkansas camps, and a 3D reconstruction of a barracks block in a game engine. So we've been working on this ever since 2013. And we've actually had continuous funding through for this project through several phases. I think we are now in our fourth round of funding for this project. And our subsequent efforts have allowed us to augment the original site with new materials, new features, and to expand to include the Jerome camp. So our most recent phase, one of the things that we're working on is aggregating data on all approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans that were incarcerated during World War II, so that we can illustrate the impacts of incarceration on their pre-war communities. So the current estimates show that there were between 80 and 90 well-established Nihon machis, which was what the Japan towns were known as, before the mass removal and incarceration from the West Coast. As of today, there are only 3 Japan towns remaining, and they're all 3 in California. There's one in Los Angeles, there's one in San Jose, and there's one in San Francisco. And by comparison, in 1940, the San Francisco Japantown covered around 40 city blocks, and it's now reduced to 6. So an important story about what this did to fragment families and communities as a result of incarceration. So as far as the technologies and the processes, this is where I'm going to nerd out a little bit, probably, because this is really what I am most familiar with. And I'm going to talk mostly about the processes and the technologies we used to build the maps and the 3D reconstruction. We started in GIS because that was going to serve as the basis for every other visualization that we did. The first thing we did was we had to collect the original construction documents that the WRA produced, and they were in terrible shape. They were really distorted. They were in pieces because they were preserved through microfiche, and they couldn't fit the whole print on one page. So that we had to splice together these different images of the original documents and then georeference them, which is tying them to their actual physical location on Earth. And we did that by identifying points that were evident in the construction documents with points that were still visible in aerial imagery. So it's usually something like road intersections or known points like survey monuments. But once we were able to georeference all of these historic construction documents, we could start digitizing them in GIS and adding attribute information to them. You know, things like building name, building number, road names, giving them appropriate size and dimension. And so the camp layout itself was really important for the interactive maps, but it also formed the foundation of the 3D reconstruction. And this is where my previous experience in land development really came in handy, because I was used to creating and interpreting construction documents. So one of the essential components of the 3D reconstruction was a ground surface, but we didn't have a grading plan for the site. And we knew that the ground had been heavily manipulated because there were real drainage problems. The site itself was pretty flat, but the land didn't drain well, and it caused lots of problems for the people who lived there. So they kind of had to go back and improvise. And they created this drainage system by developing, drainage ditches. And you can see one of them in the photo, the historic photo. They were basically little drainage ditches that completely surrounded each barracks block. But we didn't have any of the information necessary to create a ground surface. And we didn't have the relevant plans for Rower. We did, however, have a drainage plan that was used at Jerome that helped us identify the size and the geometries of the drainage system and develop a reasonable idea of how they had organized the drainage system. And we were able to, take those basic concepts and apply them at Rower. But we still didn't have all of the information we needed to actually build an elevation surface. The one thing that we did have was a sanitary sewer layout. And that sanitary sewer layout had denoted rim elevations for each of the manholes. And so based on this other documentation from Jerome and the fact that we had rim elevations of the manholes, we were able to create a digital elevation model of the site that could be used as a ground surface in the actual 3D model. And so as I was working on this, my colleague Angie Payne was building 3D models of all the buildings within the residential block using the original floor plans and elevations, and then creating photorealistic textures to apply to the surfaces. So once those were done, we could build the foundations of the 3D reconstruction, which you can see an example of one of the early iterations of it in the top right corner of the page, and then build it out with vegetation and the structures that we could see that were added in historic photos. I want to take a little bit of a detour here to give a shout out to Angie for her work on these models, because she had a level of commitment to realism and detail that was just phenomenal. And my example is that, she had to create the vegetation that was added to kind of build out these 3D models and make them look realistic, to the extent that we were identifying trees that we know would have been on site and going around and finding local examples of those trees so that she could take a picture of the bark so that even the bark pattern is reflective of the actual tree species that was used within the model. So moving on to the work that we're doing with regarding the CCC and Arkansas State Parks. This is a partnership between Arkansas State Parks, the Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies, and UA Landscape Architecture. It's funded through ANCRC. And this is, we're going to be documenting several different state parks that have CCC structures. And all of these projects are pretty similar in terms of deliverables. So I'm going to talk about them kind of as a group rather than individually. For each of these projects, the general workflow has been that CAST has acquired the geospatial data, primarily using either terrestrial or drone LiDAR, while Kimball and I have focused on the site research, writing, and documentation. And then those elements go back to CAST to develop into story maps that are publicly accessible. So this is, like I said, this is kind of a generalized workflow. So there are tweaks that depend on the site we're working on. So far, we have completed the CCC documentation at Devil's Den. This consisted of both a story map and set of Howell's drawings, for which Kimball won an award. I was only peripherally involved in Devil's Den and didn't get deeply involved until we started working on Buffalo Point. For Buffalo Point, it was really about the research and the story map. We did not create Howell's drawings for these, but we did do the research and provide the written text for the story maps. This summer, we've been working on the CCC at Pettigene. We are creating a Howell's drawing set that is in process. We're still putting the finishing touches on that. And then a story map for Pettigene State Park will be coming soon. And I think the next up is Lake Catherine, which is scheduled for summer of 2027. The other primary projects we've been working on lately is a set of Howell's drawings for the Vicksburg National Military Cemetery. We completed these in the summer and fall of 2024. So Vicksburg National Military Cemetery is an approximately 116-acre site with over 17,000 burial sites, and approximately 13,000 of those are for unidentified soldiers. Most, but not all, of the 17,000 sites are for Civil War troops or veterans. So if you're not familiar with Howell's documentation, basically what you're doing is you're documenting all the existing conditions, including all the structures, the vegetation, the infrastructure, including materials used, and of course the topography. So this can include several plan sheets as well as detailed drawings of structures and sections through the site to illustrate terrain and other important features. I think on average, our Howell's drawings consist of usually 6 to 10 pages of documentation. It's very highly detailed, and these are submitted to the Library of Congress. So if you've never been to Vicksburg, one of the characteristics of it is that it's built in numerous terraces that have very steep sides because it's constructed on loess soil. And if you're not familiar with loess, it's a silty soil formed by wind deposits. And it's unusual in that it has a very high angle of repose, meaning that steeper slopes are generally more stable than gentler slopes because it is so highly erodible. So where loess soils aren't covered by vegetation, they tend to erode into cavities that have near vertical walls. And so when slumping of those soils occurs, they can be catastrophic. And that's what's happened here at Vicksburg in 2022 and 2023. And you can see where there's black visqueen covering these soils, that's what's happened. Several of the roads throughout the park were undercut and have failed. And in the cemetery, some of the burial terraces were affected, which led the National Park Service to request that we continue this work next summer to document all 17,000 plus headstones in the cemetery using geospatial technologies. So we're going to be documenting the exact location, basic attribute information, including the type of headstone, any text that's or numeric data that's engraved on it, and assessing the condition for long-term monitoring and maintenance. And we're really excited about this project. It's kind of been a departure for us from what we normally do in terms of landscape documentation. And so far, there's only been one other similar inventory in a national park. So we're also going to be asked to document our methodology in report format and in journal format for replication. And that's really all I have. And I'm going to flash my contact information up there if anybody wants access to it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Robyn. I'm going to share my screen. And as Robyn said, we're cousins, and I think you'll see some interesting overlaps in our research and preservation interests that I wasn't even aware of until watching this presentation. It's not. I have to share again, so my apologies. There we go. So a little bit about me. I'm an Arkansas native. I grew up in Searcy and went to Harding for an interior design degree, was interested in history from a young age. My mother is a historian, so it is in my blood, I guess. So after an interior design degree, I decided I wasn't ready to get a job. So I spent a year in Europe as a nanny, which was one of the best decisions of my life, and fell in love with, all of the historic structures I saw there, and went back for a graduate degree in interior architecture and preservation in North Carolina at Greensboro. I met my husband there, so that worked out well for me. And then in 2008, I returned to Little Rock and worked at SCM Architects doing preservation and interior design. And then moved to Philadelphia for a few years, and then we came back to Northwest Arkansas in 2019. Since then, I've been working at SCM full-time until last year, and last year I made the jump to teaching full-time at U of A in the interior design department. There I teach the history of interiors course. I also teach studio courses in digital media. So that's about me. I wanted to start with my graduate work, just as kind of a basis of where I started in preservation. Here you can see some photogrammetry projects. Here, this is an image of Bellamy slave quarters in Wilmington, North Carolina, that we documented using digital photogrammetry in 2007. And then I also was able to do an internship at Old Salem Museum and Gardens in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And then my thesis work actually goes back to Little Rock, focusing on 6 historic churches and how they interacted and changed with the community over a period of about 100 years. So on the left, you'll see a map of kind of all of the churches that were listed in the 1905 city directory. And then I narrowed that down to the 6 churches that you see listed there: First Lutheran, First Methodist, the Cathedral of St. Andrews, First Presbyterian, St. Edward's, and First Missionary Baptist, because all of those congregations were still in place from that 1905 city directory listing. They were all listed on the National Register, and they were all still active congregations. So what I did over the course of that thesis was visit the churches, visit the archives, do a contemporary literature review of all of their congregational documentation and histories, as well as relevant newspaper articles and denominational information available about the architectural style of the structures, but also the social impacts they were having in their local congregation. So from the data I collected using Sanborn maps and historic imagery,
that was available, I was able to recreate these structures using SketchUp and applying these postcard images to them to look at them stylistically from the exterior, but also using their internal data of bulletins and whatnot to document how the space was used. What part was used for corporate worship, what part was used for education, what was social space, and how these congregations changed and evolved over a 100-year period. So here you're seeing an example of First Methodist Church, looking at it 1900 and then 1920, and then 1950 and 1970. And you see, and what we found in that study was congregations changed pretty consistently, initially building a small worship center, expanding to an education space, then to a social space, and then what we would call non-congregational space. In the case of First Methodist, it was a mixed-use space that was actually rentable. And that was a pretty consistent theme, and it happened, kind of every 20 years across all of these congregations in different ways. Another way that I looked at this data was to create timelines. So you can see here that for each church, I created a timeline. And you can see we looked at the visual sources, so comparing the contemporary photographs and floor plans we had versus the documentary sources, looking at things like style, material, furnishing, space usage. And then, let's see if I can get it. That, we got a bunch of different data depending on the congregation. Some had archives, some had books that were written, some had very little firsthand documentation. So the results were skewed, but we did find a pretty consistent theme of about every 20 years, there was a big shift. First, it was always worship. Second, it was always education, then activity space, and so on. So that was my thesis work. And then when I came back to Little Rock to practice, my first project was at Arkansas Baptist College in Little Rock, their old main building. This is a historically Black college that was founded in 1887. This structure was built in 1894 as the main building and also initially served as the women's dormitory. It was funded partially by the National Park Service. They had a historically Black college university fund. And we were able to utilize that funding for a good bit of the restoration work on this. You can see here the restored exterior. The porches had to be fully restored. You can see there's a moat around the structure as well. That was restored, and there's a bell tower as well that was fully restored on the exterior. Windows were reconstructed. Interior storm windows were put on. There was extensive work done to the dormers and soffits as well in terms of preservation. And on the next page, you'll see the floor plan. So the university needed this space to come back with primarily classroom space. So if you look on the ground floor, you'll see classroom space, accessible restrooms were added, some mechanical space as required for all the upgrades. And then on the second floor, you can see a large chapel. This space was restored and is used for chapels and large classrooms. And then on plan right, you'll see a conference room, an executive conference room, and a new egress stair as required by code. On the third floor, you see more classroom spaces. And then on the fourth floor, which was originally the women's dormitory, this became the executive suite, housing the president's office and his administrative team and conference area. So here you can see the before and after of the chapel. We worked closely on this with Frank Welsh, who did historic paint analysis in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. You can see in that small picture in the middle, the historic paint analysis gave us the original paint color of the room, which we were able to restore. We were also able to reuse much of the original beadboard and trim and window casings and have them replicated as required. And you can see the original column profile on the back wall here that was replicated for the proscenium. Here you can see a classroom shot on the third floor with the large windows allowing the natural daylight in, and then restoring those to the original paint colors and trim profiles as well. Here's another shot of the interior where you can see the stair, the communicating stair that we added between the 4th and 3rd floor spaces. And then as this project was being constructed, they were constructing a new science building adjacent to it, and they requested a connecting sky bridge. So if you look in the center photo, you see this ramp, and right around the corner, you would see that connection to the sky bridge. The next project I worked on was Mather Lodge at Pettigene. It was originally constructed in the 30s as part of the CCC work, and there was an existing restaurant and kitchen that was built in 1964 that was added to the lodge. That was demolished, and a new restaurant and kitchen addition was put in place. It was done in a very similar style to the existing lodge. And as part of this project, here you can see a plan showing kind of the original lodge, the breezeway, and then the original CCC dining room and the original lobby, and that new restaurant and kitchen addition. It was very important to us that we were sensitive to the original material and the significance of the site, and a lot of time and effort was put into really celebrating that connection between old and new instead of trying to hide it. So you'll see an image inside where we kind of try to celebrate and show that CCC dining room connection. As part of that work, you can see original images of the lodge construction above. And then we worked closely at the beginning to do log restoration and repair to the lodge, but also to the boathouse and other structures at the park. So here you can see some of our details and documentation of log repair and re-chinking the logs, and then eventually putting that protective coating on top of them, hopefully to make them last longer with the Dutchman repairs. Here is a construction photo of in process of kind of that main view looking into the valley. We prepared interior elevations, worked on finishes very closely with Arkansas State Parks. I remember as a very young designer sitting with Arkansas State Parks and picking the carpet, and they said, well, are those all native trees to the state of Arkansas? And I went, I don't know. So I learned a lot on this project. We did get all native leaves on the carpet at Mather Lodge eventually, but it was a learning process. And then here you can see on the far right that connection of the CCC dining room being celebrated and embraced in that lobby that welcomes you into the new dining room space. And we worked closely with them as well on the furniture selection. We use the same furniture company that's been making state park furniture for a century. It's the same company that makes the furniture at the Ahwahnee in Yosemite and in the Grand Canyon. And here you can see some interior photos of it upon completion. This was completed in 2012, I believe. When I returned to Arkansas, I got to work at Arkansas Tech. This was Williamson Hall. It was constructed in the 1940s. It was also funded by the national government as part of the National Youth Administration. And it was listed on the National Register in 1922. Unfortunately, it was undergoing a renovation in 2019. At the conclusion of that renovation, there was a fire on the roof, and most of the structure was severely damaged, as you can see in that photo. Further complicating that was after the damage and after all of the water was introduced, they had extensive mold and environmental damage because the water in the structure sat for a while. So SCM was asked to come in and help see if this could be maintained as a National Register listing at ATU. And we first conducted a feasibility study on the ability to restore it, and then we broke it into two phases. First, you can see stabilization and shoring, just making sure it was safe. And then the second was an exterior restoration, and we restored the interior corridors as well. The building is used primarily for classroom space. There's a dining addition that was, I think, in the 90s that you'll see as well. That was not restored. So here you can see the shoring work. We were lucky that we had original drawings from that 1940 period of the portico and interior lobby, and those really guided the restoration process. So basically, all of the roof structure was removed, most of the second floor was removed, all the interior finishes were removed to the studs everywhere to allow for environmental remediation. On the first floor of the lobby, there was an original linoleum floor logo that had the National Youth Association emblem on it within the state of Arkansas. While that original logo was too damaged to save, it was documented, and then we were able to replicate it with laser jet cutting linoleum and restore that lobby to its original 1940s appearance. So on the right, you're seeing the restored lobby. On the interior corridors, we were able to salvage most of the original and historic trim and paneling. The paneling itself was had been replaced or covered, so you can see that kind of bubbled paneling in this picture on the right. But the original paneling was underneath it, and it was able to be replicated. So you can see on the bottom left, we had extensive drawings replicating all of the original millwork profiles. And what was salvageable, we were able to put back in the prime spaces, and then everything else was replicated to match exactly to those original profiles. And we used Frank Walsh again for historic paint analysis of those spaces to replicate the color scheme as well. It turned out to be white, but you never know. In addition to that, we do a lot of work on the University of Arkansas campus and campuses throughout the state through on-call contracts and ANCRC funded projects. A few of the projects we've worked on at the University of Arkansas include Old Main. We've done the East Portico restoration, a dormer restoration, the clock tower construction. We also worked on the ROTC building, sometimes called Women's Gymnasium, when we did an exterior restoration on that project. We just finished a project at 310 Arkansas Avenue, which was originally a Lutheran church, and where we did a window replacement, an exterior restoration. We've worked on the Greek Theater, on Engineering Hall. That historic window replacement is just about to wrap up. And Memorial Hall, we've worked on masonry restoration, historic windows, and exterior lighting. You can see some images of these attached. The Women's Gymnasium was an interesting project that had an original asbestos tile roof. We were able to replicate that with a zinc tile roof system and then replicate the original stucco as well. You can see here Engineering Hall in the middle, where we were able to remove storefront and, poorly fabricated windows from an energy perspective and replicate windows based on the original profiles and restore those at Engineering Hall. Memorial Hall, we had masonry repair. We also restored the original exterior lighting, and we have a small interior renovation project going on that project as well. We've done several projects at UA Monticello as well. We worked on the Captain Henderson House, where we've done extensive exterior restoration to this Queen Anne style structure. It's used as a bed and breakfast on campus. We were able to put a new roof on it, restore the chimneys as well. And then you'll see here, we've done work on the Trotter House, which has an exterior, we had two phases, an exterior paint and restoration phase and an interior project as well, where we were able to have our paint analysis come and stay and replicate historic wall coverings, historic trim, do faux wood graining on all of the original trim. And then the 1937 Faculty House, also at UAM, was completed in 2024. It was an interior restoration, and we were able to replicate the original wall coverings in this house as well, which is what you're seeing here from historic documentation. We've also worked on the Barkman House and Horsefall Hall. In addition to that, we've done a few courthouse preservation master plans. The two most recent ones we've worked on are Clay County Courthouse in Piggott and the Craighead County Courthouse in Jonesboro. And those projects have moved from the master plan phase to being funded and slowly progressing with ANCRC funds and courthouse easement funds to get closer to where they need to be. So we've done roof work on both of these and working on additional projects for those as well. I've got.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you both. If anybody has questions for Robyn and Rachel, you still have time to type those in the chat or in the Q&A. Right now, you've got one, and that is for Rachel. Somebody asked what the furniture manufacturer was that you mentioned from Mather Lodge.
I'll have to look. I don't remember. Honestly, it was a few years ago, but I know that I can find it and I can tell you the name of it. So if you put your email in there, I will. I'm sorry, you're correct about the Henderson House is in Arkadelphia. I conflated those.
That's okay. That's okay. There's lots of the two
Yeah.
white houses, one at the Trotter House at UAM and the Henderson House,
Yep.
yes, in Arkadelphia. Okay, so I don't see any more questions yet, but if you are the person who asked the question about the furniture company, if you want to put your email, yes, or send an email directly to Rachel, then she'll get you the answer. Okay. Well, I had a couple questions. First, I was thinking about the preservation plans that y'all have worked on recently, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the Clay County courthouse plan. So now that things that were completed in 1975 or earlier are considered historic, what kind of challenges does that pose for us, especially, in your line of work, if you're trying to write a preservation plan for the Clay County Courthouse, which I think was what, 60s probably.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you evaluating all of those systems?
Yeah, there are a lot of material challenges that we're running into. A lot of the new slick, cool things that were amazing in the 60s have not, lasted, and finding acceptable substitutions for them has been a challenge for sure. So materiality has been a big one. And then obviously the concerns about HVAC and ASHRAE and, meeting any kind of code is challenging given the openings in the systems that were originally in place. So, it's always a balancing act to try to decide what's the most important thing, because somebody needs air conditioning in their office, and we can't always do that in a way that preserves the original intent of the designer.
Yes. Okay, I have a question from Vanessa McEwen for Rachel, wondering if you've come across or helped preserve any historic linoleum flooring or Quaker rugs.
What we were fortunate, we worked with Forbo, who's a manufacturer, I think out of Australia. They have representation in the US, and then they're headquartered in the US and Pennsylvania. But we worked with Forbo to do the linoleum flooring at Williamson, and they are able to, their color line is pretty extensive. For enough quantity and enough funding, they'll kind of replicate solid colors, but in terms of the original Quaker patterned things, we have not really found a good source for that. We have enjoyed looking on the Internet Archive, though, and the APTI heritage site, and documenting that stuff. That's been a really helpful source for us to find precedent of what probably was there in many cases. So if you haven't used that website, I would highly recommend it. You can put that in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, let's see, from Lisa Skiles, what has your training and experience prepared you the most for thinking on your feet when in the field or when faced with challenges? That could be for either one of you.
I will say that we just assume when we go out in the field that something's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And so, and that's just experience. You can get out there, and I'm speaking specifically from the technical side of it. Most recently, when we were at Pettigene doing some additional field work to document the site. Particularly, we wanted to get one of the dams over by the one of the pavilions. And we were using a relatively new drone that's supposed to be uncrashable because it's got so many sensors, and it didn't recognize the water. So it just did a straight drop behind the dam to scan the back side of the dam and sunk to the bottom of the lake. So, you lose batteries, you damage equipment, you can't, your technology breaks, and how do you improvise? And so I think that's been our biggest, is being conversant in multiple methods of acquiring data and dealing with those challenges when they arise on site.
Yep. And always try to be prepared and think about that stuff in advance and pack extra
Always.
backups. Okay, let's see. Rachel, go ahead if you were about to say something. Sorry.
I wanted to say one thing. I put the archive, the Building Technology Heritage Library on there for people. If you haven't used it, it's a great resource. You can search by CSI division if you want. You can filter it by year. It has house plans. It has tile pattern books. It's been a wealth of information for us as we try to replicate things and source things. For the Williamson project, we had homosote paneling originally noted in the interior, and we found it on the drawings, but we were also able to find homosote paneling catalogs from the same period on the website, which really validated what we were trying to replicate. We didn't replicate with homosote because of, finish issues, but we were able to get the same profiles and be pretty confident in what we were replicating. So that's a great source.
Okay, thank you. I think I just copied it and shared it with everyone.
Perfect.
I think it went to hosts and panelists the first time. So there we go. Everybody's got it now. You're welcome. Okay, we had another question. Are you seeing challenges with finding funding for projects right now?
Always.
Yeah. I mean, we've been lucky architecturally. Most of our stuff is through university work, and most of it is funded largely by the ANCRC, which has held steady so far, but we anticipate, that may change. We certainly haven't gotten as many large-scale preservation projects, but kind of the keep it going long enough preservation projects, we've still been able to do those kind of step by step, year by year.
We this year, because we are in our fourth round of funding through the NPS JAX program, we were very concerned that could be considered a DEI program and funding would be stopped on it. So far, we've been assured that it will not be, that it will continue through the duration of the project, but it's an ongoing concern.
Definitely. Thank you. Let's see. My question that I wanted to ask was related to, so you both work with a lot of digital technology in your teaching and in practice. So as things are rapidly evolving, how do you see the use of digital technology in historic site interpretation or in project design? How do you see us using that? How's it going to change like in 10 years? So now it's like we use a lot of drones. We've talked about that, but is there something that you think is coming on the horizon that's going to change?
Well, I'll say, oh, go ahead, Robyn.
Oh, I was just going to say that, based on what's happened in the past, what we're going to find is that it's more affordable and more widely available. When I first started working with 3D laser scanners, you were talking $150,000 for a single unit. And now I can do laser scans that's actually pretty well geo-referenced with my iPhone. Um, so I think it's going to continue to accelerate. And the problems that you always have with that are um, a lack of maybe knowledge or experience in how to deal with some of the issues that can arise in digital technology. Um, One of the trends I see is that in some cases, it becomes more like um, I'm playing with a video game rather than understanding the models and assumptions that go into the use of the technology. And so you get the assumption that just because you put it into the computer and the computer spits it out, it's correct or accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. I was sitting in a meeting a week ago, and to echo what Robyn said, we were looking at new rendering software, and the new intern, not an intern, the new hire said, "Oh, but this is great because I don't have to make a bump map anymore. I can just take the image and then the AI does it and then it does it for me." I was like, "But is it right?" "Well, I don't know. Have you ever made a bump map before?" "Well, no, but this one looks good, doesn't it?" And I was like,
Yes.
but that's not quite how it works." So it's here. The AI is here. The students are embracing it for good or for bad. So um, I feel old, but I keep saying things to students like, but you have to know how to do it manually. You
Yes.
have to understand why and how to do it the old-fashioned way. So when it doesn't work in AI, because there will be a time it doesn't work, you're going to have to be able to do it. You can't just ask ChatGPT to do it again on every task that you're asked to do. So I feel like understanding the fundamentals is really important right now.
And I'm going to expand on that even a little bit because I feel like maybe we're sandwiched in between generations that understand, for that generation who understands the analog and the digital. Because I ran into it when I was still in practice with older engineers. When I was still in practice, we were looking at a drone and how that's going to revolutionize surveying. Well, the problem is with, trying to use a drone for surveying is that there are certain times of the year you're not going to be able to use it. There are certain conditions that you're not going to be able to use it effectively to do any kind of topographical survey. And, you know, our chief engineer was saying, well, no, this is going to do it all for us automatically. And I'm like, when you're talking about doing drone surveys of landscapes and especially if you're trying to do photogrammetry where foliage moves, and so when it's trying to find common points between different scans to reference them together, it's a lot harder than when you have very hard rigid edges. And so it's not just the younger generation, it's older generations who grew up who did not learn these technologies or didn't have access to these technologies. So
Right. And then you mentioned AI, but it's just I feel like it's gonna change everything the way that everybody does their business. But I think it's something that, I mean, would you agree that yes, we have to embrace it? We just have to, you need to know how to do it. You need to know how to check the AI, but also use it, because if you're not using it and inputting information into it to make it smarter, right, then somebody else is. Maybe with the wrong information. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah,
it,
that's tough.
there's so many ethical and environmental considerations to the use of AI that as a landscape architect, I worry about always. We can go into, social justice issues with, what neighborhoods are affected by the environmental consequences of the AI farms.
Mm-hmm.
How do
Yes,
you
Lindsay.
teach? Yeah, how do you
Yeah.
teach ethical and responsible use of a new technology? We always face that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's complex. Let's see. Okay. Vanessa, she's asking, are you seeing increased interest in the preservation studies within the U of A Fay Jones School preservation program, within that degree program?
What's the program preservation piece from UVE?
I'm having trouble hearing you. I don't know if I'm the only one.
I think it varies from you. And I haven't seen any patterns in it yet. As that there's lots of opportunities out there, but we have such a diverse group of students that you can't, at least from our perspective. What about you, Rachel? Are you seeing
I
any
mean,
patterns?
I have not seen a lot. I mean, my history of interiors course is a 200 level course, so they leave generally before they have that kind of focus, I would say. But that hopefully the graduate program is in the catalog now and will start. There's a kind of a revamp going for the graduate programs, but I'm hopeful that we'll really start seeing that flesh out in the next year or two.
We are too. We need more preservation architects and preservation professionals across the board. So we hope so
Yeah.
too. Okay, well, that's all the questions that I see. And thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and expertise with us and for your time this afternoon. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.